The message came at midnight Galactic Standard Time. It was a simple signal, repeating over and over on every emergency channel. The words were broken and filled with static, but their meaning was clear. Someone was dying and they were begging for help. There was under attack. In the Great Hall of the Galactic Federation, hundreds of alien delegates sat in stunned silence. The holographic display showed the planet, a beautiful world of purple oceans and silver forests. But now, dark shapes moved across its surface. Ships that looked like living things, with flesh instead of metal and teeth instead of weapons. The Wraith Collective had arrived. The ambassador stood at the center of the hall. Her name was Lyra, and she was crying. Her species had delicate bodies that glowed with soft blue light, and that light was flickering now like a candle in the wind. She had been speaking for 10 minutes, pleading with every species in the Federation to send help. No one moved. The Wraith were ancient. They had existed before most civilizations learned to build fire. They moved from world to world, consuming everything. Their ships were alive, grown from the flesh of their victims. Their soldiers were once people, transformed into mindless drones. No one had ever defeated them. The best anyone could do was run. One by one, the alien delegates made their excuses. They said their fleet was too far away. They claimed they were bound by treaties of non-interference. They simply said nothing and turned off their transmission. Within an hour, the Great Hall was nearly empty. Lyra fell to her knees. Her light was almost gone now. 8 million of her people were about to die, and no one in the entire galaxy would lift a finger to save them. Then a door opened at the back of the hall. A young woman walked in. She wore a simple black uniform with a small blue planet stitched on her shoulder. Her hair was dark and tied back in a practical style. Her face showed no fear, no doubt, no hesitation. She walked to the center of the hall and looked down at the weeping ambassador. Her name was, and she spoke for Earth. The remaining delegates watched with confusion. Earth was a new member of the Federation, accepted only 20 years ago. Their planet was classified as a place so dangerous that most species could not survive there for more than a few hours. The gravity was crushing. The atmosphere was corrosive. The native life forms killed and ate each other constantly. And the humans themselves were considered unstable, emotional, and prone to violence. No one expected them to care about a dying alien world. Helped Lyra to her feet. She spoke softly, but her voice carried through the silent hall. She asked Lyra to repeat the coordinates of her. Then she pulled out a small communication device and pressed a single button. Somewhere across the galaxy, alarms began to sound. The Federation delegates did not understand what was happening, explained it simply. Earth had received the distress signal 6 hours ago. While the Federation debated, humanity had already begun to move. The shock armada was mobilizing. 200 warships, 50,000 soldiers, and enough weapons to crack a moon in half. They would arrive at the in 18 hours. One of the delegates, a tall creature with 4 arms and scales like copper, stood up and demanded an explanation. This was madness, he said. The Wraith had destroyed civilizations older than humanity. Earth's fleet would be slaughtered. Why would they throw away so many lives for strangers? Turned to face him, her expression did not change. She said only 4 words. Because they asked. The delegate had no response. He sat down slowly, his scales shifting to a color that meant confusion and fear. Across the stars, aboard the flagship Defiance, Admiral received confirmation that the Armada was ready. He was 53 years old, with gray hair cut short and scars on his hands from a lifetime of war. He had fought pirates, rebels, and hostile aliens. He had buried friends and sent young soldiers to their deaths. He knew exactly what they were flying into. His tactical officer commander stood beside him. She was younger, with sharp eyes and a mind that could calculate 1,000 variables in seconds. She had already plotted their jump coordinates and analyzed the enemy fleet. The numbers were not good. The Wraith had over 500 in orbit around the world. Humanity would be outnumbered more than 2 to 1. Asked her if she was afraid, thought about the question for a moment. Then she said that fear was a luxury they could not afford. There were people dying who had called for help. Everything else was just details. The Admiral nodded. He opened a channel to every ship in the fleet. His voice was calm and steady, the voice of a man who had made peace with death long ago. He told them that they were about to fight an enemy that had never been beaten. He told them that many of them would not come home. He told them that the galaxy had already written off the as dead, and that no one expected humanity to succeed. Then he smiled just slightly. He told them that humanity had never cared much for expectations. They came from a world that tried to kill them every single day, and they had not only survived but thrived. They had climbed out of the mud, reached for the stars, and refused to stop no matter how many times the universe pushed them down. Today, he said, they would show the galaxy what we're made of. The fleet jumped to hyperspace, and the stars blurred into lines of light. 18 hours later, they would arrive at the 18 hours after that, the galaxy would learn to fear a new name. The humans were coming. The sky above them was filled with monsters. Wraith hung in orbit like a swarm of insects, their flesh-covered hulls pulsing with sickly green light. They had been feeding on the planet for 3 days now. Landing pods fell like rain, carrying drones to the surface. Cities burned. Millions had already died. The survivors hid in underground shelters, waiting for the end. Then space itself seemed to tear open. 200 human warships burst out of hyperspace in perfect formation. They were smaller than the Wraith, built from steel and titanium instead of flesh and bone. Their hulls were painted black, marked with white numbers and the blue symbol of Earth. Weapons ports opened along their sides like the eyes of predators waking from sleep. Admiral stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching the enemy fleet on his display. The Wraith had noticed them immediately. Were already turning, hundreds of organic weapons charging with deadly energy. The hive mind that controlled them had consumed civilizations for millions of years. It had never lost a battle. Did not care about history. He opened a channel to his fleet and gave a simple order: weapons free. Show them what a breeds. The battle began. Human ships moved with terrifying speed and precision. They did not fly in straight lines like most species did. They spun and rolled and changed direction in ways that seemed impossible. Their pilots were trained from childhood to handle extreme forces that would kill most aliens instantly. They fired missiles that split into dozens of smaller warheads, each one seeking a different target. They used kinetic cannons that launched metal slugs at a fraction of the speed of light. The Wraith had never faced anything like this. Lieutenant led a squadron of 12 interceptors directly into the heart of the swarm. She was 26 years old, with steady hands and eyes that never blinked during combat. Her ship was small enough to slip between them, fast enough to dodge their attacks, and armed with enough firepower to punch holes through their hulls. She lost 4 pilots in the first minute. The Wraith were adapting, learning human tactics and adjusting their attacks. Watched her friends die on her sensors, their ships torn apart by organic weapons that fired acid and bone. She did not slow down. She did not turn back. Her squadron destroyed 8 before they were forced to retreat. When Commander asked why she had pushed so deep into enemy lines, gave a simple answer: retreat was not the mission. On the planet's surface, the real horror was beginning. Marine Captain led the first wave of ground troops. They came down in armored, falling through the burning atmosphere like meteors. The Wraith had already established a presence on the surface, transforming captured into drones. These poor creatures no longer had minds of their own. They existed only to serve the hive, to fight and die and be recycled into new soldiers. Had seen terrible things in his career, but nothing like this. His Marines hit the ground running. They wore powered armor that made them stronger and faster than any natural human. They carried kinetic rifles that could punch through concrete walls and plasma blades that burned hot enough to cut through anything. They moved through the ruined streets of a city, searching for survivors. They found them hiding in a basement beneath a collapsed building. 300 civilians, mostly children and elderly, their bioluminescent skin flickering with fear. They screamed when they first saw the humans, thinking they were more monsters come to take them. Removed his helmet so they could see his face. He was not a monster. He was not here to hurt them. He was here to help. They did not understand. No one came to help. That was not how the galaxy worked. The strong consumed the weak. The powerful ignored the powerless. This was the natural order of things. The humans did not seem to care about the natural order. Marines formed a protective circle around the survivors. They carried the wounded on their backs. They gave their food and water to the children. They stood in the open and drew enemy fire so the civilians could escape. 17 Marines died in the first hour of ground operations, and not one of them complained. In orbit, the battle raged on. Human ships were taking heavy damage. The carrier Horizon took a direct hit to its engine section and began to fall toward the planet. Its captain ordered all hands to abandon ship, then deliberately steered the dying vessel into a cluster of. The explosion destroyed 12 enemy craft. The Wraith hive mind observed all of this with growing confusion. These creatures made no sense. They did not fight like prey. They did not fight like predators. They fought like something else entirely, something the hive had never encountered in its long existence. They fought like they had nothing to lose and everything to protect. Admiral watched the battle unfold from his command chair. The cost was high. Ships were dying. Good people were dying. But the Wraith line was starting to crack. Human aggression and human stubbornness were forcing the enemy back, meter by meter, ship by ship. Commander reported that they had established a corridor to the planet's surface. Reinforcements could now reach the ground forces. The civilians had a chance. Allowed himself one moment of hope. Then he turned back to the battle. They were far from finished. The Wraith still outnumbered them, and the hive mind was learning. The next phase of the fight would be even harder. But for the first time in 3 days, they had something they had lost. They had hope. And behind that hope stood 50,000 humans who had come from the other side of the galaxy to give it to them. The battle had lasted 3 days, and the humans were winning. But victory was expensive. Admiral stood before a holographic display showing the current state of his fleet. 17 ships destroyed. 31 more damaged badly enough that they could no longer fight. Over 4,000 soldiers dead, with hundreds more wounded. The medical bays on every ship were full. The morgues were fuller. Commander walked up beside him with it in her hands. Her face was tired, dark circles under her eyes from 3 days without sleep. She had a report that could end the war in minutes, but she did not look happy about it. The Wraith were retreating. Their remaining forces had pulled back to the northern continent of the. They were gathering there, building defenses, preparing for a final stand. The hive mind knew it was losing and was concentrating everything it had left in one place. Showed the tactical analysis. A single orbital strike on the northern continent would destroy the Wraith completely. Their command structure would collapse. Their remaining drones would shut down. The war would be over. But there was a problem. 200,000 civilians were trapped in that zone. The Wraith had herded them there deliberately, using them as shields. Any orbital strike powerful enough to destroy the enemy would also kill every single one of those innocent people. Stared at the numbers for a long time. The math was simple. Sacrifice 200,000 to save millions. Any computer would make that choice in a heartbeat. Any purely logical mind would see it as the obvious solution. The Admiral shook his head. No orbital strike. They would go in on the ground. Did not argue. She had expected this answer. She began planning the assault immediately. On the surface, Captain received his new orders. His Marines had been fighting for 3 days straight. They were exhausted, low on ammunition, and many of them were carrying wounds that should have sent them to a hospital. But when he told them they were going into the northern zone on foot, not a single soldier complained. They understood what was at stake. The assault began at dawn. Human forces advanced from 3 directions, pushing through ruined cities and burning forests. The Wraith fought back with everything they had. Drones swarmed from every building. Organic artillery rained down from hidden positions. The ground itself seemed to fight against them, infected by Wraith that grabbed at their legs and tried to pull them under. Led from the front, as he always did, his armor was dented and scorched. His rifle had run out of ammunition hours ago, so he had taken one from a fallen soldier. He had stopped counting how many enemies he had killed. The number did not matter. Only the mission mattered. Behind the main assault, Medic worked without rest. She had been awake for over 40 hours, treating wounds that no human doctor should have to see. Her hands were steady even when her mind was screaming for sleep. She had learned anatomy from during the hyperspace journey, memorizing their strange biology in case she needed to save one of them. She had already saved dozens. A young girl was brought to her station, badly hurt by shrapnel from an explosion. The girl's light was fading, her body going cold. Worked frantically, using human medicine adapted for alien physiology. For 20 minutes, she refused to give up, even when the other medics told her it was hopeless. The girl lived. When she woke up, the child looked at with confusion in her large silver eyes. She asked a question that would never forget. Why did the humans come to help them? They had nothing to offer. They were weak. They could not fight. They had no value to anyone. Stop what she was doing. She looked at the child and thought about the question. She thought about her home on Earth, a small town near the mountains where her family had lived for generations. She thought about the stories her grandmother used to tell, about times when humans had helped each other for no reason except that someone needed help. She gave the only answer that made sense to her, because no one else would. The assault continued. Building by building, tunnel by tunnel, the Marines pushed the Wraith back. They found civilians hiding in basements and carried them to safety. They found Wraith breeding pits and destroyed them with fire. They found their own dead comrades and took a moment to close their eyes before moving on. The cost was terrible. By the second day of the ground assault, another 800 humans had died. The Wraith were not going quietly. They fought with the desperation of a cornered animal, knowing that defeat meant extinction. But the humans did not stop. Admiral watched the progress from orbit, tracking every squad, every casualty, every meter of ground gained. He could have ended this with fire from the sky. He could have saved human lives by sacrificing alien ones. No one would have blamed him. The Federation would have called it a necessary evil. But had not crossed the galaxy to commit necessary evils. He had come to save people, all of them if possible. On the third day, the Marines reached the heart of the Wraith stronghold. Captain stood at the entrance to an underground complex where the last of the enemy had gathered. Beyond that door were the final Wraith commanders. Beyond them were over 100,000 prisoners, still alive, still waiting to be saved. Checked his weapon, looked at his soldiers, and gave the order to advance. The final battle was about to begin. The Wraith Collective was old, older than stars, older than memory. For millions of years, it had moved through the galaxy like a plague, consuming everything in its path. It had destroyed empires that thought themselves immortal. It had eaten gods that thought themselves invincible. It had learned every trick, every strategy, every desperate gamble that prey could attempt. Nothing surprised it anymore. Until now. The hive mind watched the humans through 1,000 eyes. It saw them fight and die and keep fighting. It saw them refuse to run when running was the smart choice. It saw them carry wounded strangers on their backs while enemies shot at them from every direction. It saw them laugh in the middle of battle, as if death was a joke they had heard too many times. For the first time in its ancient existence, the Wraith felt something it had only ever caused in others: fear. These creatures were wrong. They did not follow the rules. Prey was supposed to flee or surrender. Predators were supposed to hunt for food or territory, but humans did neither. They attacked without hunger. They defended without benefit. They died for people they had never met, from a species they had only just discovered. The hive mind could not understand it, and what it could not understand it could not predict, and what it could not predict it could not defeat. Deep beneath the surface in the heart of the Wraith stronghold, the collective made a decision. It would attempt something it had never done before. It would try to negotiate. Admiral was on the bridge of the Defiance when the transmission came through. The signal was strange, organic, like a voice made of 1,000 whispers speaking at once. Commander isolated the frequency and put it on the main display. The Wraith spoke directly to the human commander. It offered a bargain. Withdraw now and the remaining humans would be spared. They were already lost, the hive mind said. They were weak creatures, barely worth consuming. Why should humans die for such pathetic things? Why throw away so many lives for strangers who could never repay the debt? Listen to the entire message without expression. When it finished, he sat in silence for a long moment. The bridge crew watched him, waiting for his response. Then he opened a channel that would broadcast on every frequency in the system. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. Cold, hard steel forged in the fires of a. He told the Wraith that it had made a mistake. It had attacked someone who called for help, and humanity had heard them. That was enough. That would always be enough. He told the Wraith that humans did not calculate the value of lives. They did not weigh strangers against friends on some cosmic scale. When someone was in danger, humans helped. It was that simple. It was that complicated. He told the Wraith that the fleet would not withdraw. The Marines would not stop. They would keep coming until every last was free or every last human was dead. There was no middle ground. There was no negotiation. Then he ended the transmission. In orbit, Lieutenant heard the Admiral's words and smiled. She had lost half her squadron over the past 4 days. Good pilots, good friends, people she had trained with and laughed with and loved like family. Their names were burned into her memory, and she would carry them for the rest of her life. However long that turned out to be. She looked at the tactical display and saw the Wraith command ship. It was the largest in the enemy fleet, a massive creature of flesh and bone that served as the central node for the hive mind's control. As long as it existed, the Wraith could coordinate their forces, adapt to human tactics, and continue fighting. If it was destroyed, the swarm would fall into chaos. Ran the numbers in her head. Her remaining fighters did not have enough firepower to destroy the command ship from a distance. Missiles would be shot down. Energy weapons would be absorbed. There was only one option that had a real chance of success. She made her decision. She ordered her squadron to provide cover, then turned her ship toward the command ship. Her engines burned at maximum power, accelerating faster than any human body should be able to handle. Warning alarms screamed in her cockpit. Her vision started to go dark around the edges. She ignored it all. The Wraith tried to stop her, moved to intercept. Organic weapons fired from every direction. Her shields failed. Her hull cracked. Fire filled her cockpit. She kept going. In the final seconds, she opened a transmission to the fleet. Her voice was steady, even as her ship fell apart around her. She told them to tell her family that she flew true. Then she cut the channel and focused on her target. Her ship hit the command ship's core at nearly the speed of light. The explosion lit up the sky above the. For a moment, there was a second sun burning in the darkness of space. The shockwave rippled through the enemy fleet, destroying dozens of and damaging hundreds more. And deep in the heart of the hive mind, something shattered. The Wraith Collective screamed, not in anger, not in defiance, but in pure animal terror. The connection between its ships was broken. The coordination that had made it invincible for millions of years was gone. Individual began to drift, confused, unable to receive orders that would never come. On the surface, Captain felt the change immediately. The drones they were fighting suddenly stopped, their movements becoming random and uncoordinated. The organized defense collapsed into chaos. He did not know what had happened. He did not need to know. All he knew was that the enemy was broken and his people were still standing. He raised his weapon and gave the order to advance. The final push had begun. The sun rose over on the fifth day, and for the first time in a week, no one was shooting. The battle was over. Human ships moved through the wreckage of the Wraith fleet, hunting down the last survivors. Without the hive mind to guide them, there were nothing more than animals, dangerous but mindless. They were destroyed one by one, methodically, without mercy. By noon, not a single Wraith vessel remained in orbit. On the surface, the Marines finished clearing the underground complex. They found the prisoners exactly where the intelligence reports said they would be. 112,000 civilians, packed into holding chambers, waiting to be processed into drones. They had been hours away from losing everything that made them who they were. Now they were free. Captain stood at the entrance to the complex, watching his soldiers escort the survivors into the sunlight. Many of them were crying, their bioluminescent skin flickering with colors that humans could not interpret. They reached out to touch the Marines as they passed, as if trying to confirm that their rescuers were real. Let them touch him. He understood. Sometimes, after the worst moments of your life, you needed to know that hope was not just a dream. Medics set up a field hospital near the complex entrance. She had been working for almost 100 hours straight now, running on stimulants and pure stubbornness. There were too many wounded, too many sick, too many people who needed help that she did not have enough hands to give. But she kept working anyway. The young girl she had saved earlier found her during a rare break. The girl's name was something could not pronounce, a series of musical tones that her human throat could not produce. So she just called her Little Light, because that was what her flickering skin reminded her of. Little Light sat next to and did not say anything. She just stayed close, as if the human medic was the safest thing in the universe. Put an arm around her and let her rest. Some wounds needed more than medicine to heal. In orbit, Admiral reviewed the final casualty reports. The numbers were heavy: 23 ships destroyed, 4,716 dead, thousands more wounded. The shock Armada had paid a terrible price for this victory. But the was saved. Of the 8 million who had lived there before the attack, 2.3 million survived. Without human intervention, that number would have been 0. Commander entered the bridge with a cup of coffee that she pressed into the Admiral's hands. She looked as tired as he felt, but there was something in her eyes that had not been there before. Pride, maybe, or satisfaction, or just the quiet relief of someone who had done the right thing and lived to see the results. She asked him if it was worth it. All those lives lost, all that suffering endured, all those families who would never see their loved ones again. Was saving strangers worth that price? Thought about Lieutenant. He had watched the recording of her final moments a dozen times. He had seen her ship accelerate towards certain death, had heard her voice steady and calm as she said her last words. She had known exactly what she was doing. She had chosen it freely. He told that he could not answer for any of the others who died. He could only speak for himself. And for himself, yes, it was worth it. Because the alternative was a galaxy where no one helped anyone, where the weak were always crushed and the strong never cared. He did not want to live in that galaxy. He did not want humanity to be that kind of species. 3 days later, a ceremony was held on the surface of the Admiral walked through the ruins of what had once been a beautiful city. Beside him was an elder named, one of the few leaders who had survived the attack. Moved slowly, his age showing in the dim flicker of his skin, but his eyes were sharp and clear. Around them, human soldiers worked alongside civilians. They were clearing rubble, distributing food, setting up temporary shelters. The work would take years, maybe decades, but it had begun. Was quiet for a long time, watching the humans help his people. Finally, he asked the question that everyone wanted answered. Why had humans come? They were strangers from the other side of the galaxy. They had nothing to gain. They could not repay them, could not offer them anything of value. Why did they sacrifice so much for people they did not know? Considered the question carefully. He thought about Earth, his violent, beautiful, impossible. A planet where everything wanted to kill you, where survival was never guaranteed, where humans had clawed their way up from nothing through sheer stubborn refusal to die. He told that humans were. They were forged in fire, raised on a planet that tried to kill them every day. They had learned to fight because they had no choice, but they had also learned something else. They had learned that the universe was cold and dark and uncaring, and they had decided to be the ones who cared anyway. Did not respond immediately. He looked up at the sky, where human ships still orbited, standing guard over a world that was no longer alone. Then he looked back at, and for the first time since the attack began, his skin glowed with a color that meant hope. He said that his people would never forget. For as long as they existed, they would remember the day that came. They would tell stories about the humans who crossed the galaxy to answer a stranger's cry for help. They would teach their children that the universe was not as dark as they had believed. Because somewhere out there, in the cold between the stars, there were beings who chose to be kind. Nodded and said nothing. There was nothing more to say. The Galactic Federation would study the battle for centuries. They would analyze human tactics, human physiology, human psychology. They would try to understand how a species from a could be capable of such violence and such compassion at the same time. They would never fully succeed. But they would remember the lesson. When they hear a cry for help, they do not calculate odds or weigh benefits. They simply answer. And the galaxy would never be the same.